I don't know if it's frequent that psychologists introduce social workers, but I have to do that today. And I don't know how often it is someone from Machon Shechter gets to introduce someone from Yeshiva University. But in any event, I'm happy to welcome Jay Sweifach. I got that. Okay, close enough. I tried to get it on Google pronunciation, and I never asked him how to say it before he got here. Jay is a social worker at Yeshiva University, and he studies the Jewish community, domestic violence, volunteerism, disaster work, group work practice, and the Cuban Jewish community. Jay, you didn't know, and I didn't know until a little bit earlier, that one of our other participants, Miriam, is actually from Cuba. So she may have some interesting insights to give back to you. So.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. I am in the School of Social Work. Yeshiva University has a number of different schools. We have a medical school, we have, which is Einstein, we have a school of psychology, Furkhoff, we have a school of business, and I'm in the School of Social Work. And I'm a professor there. I've been there for about 17 years. So, can you all hear me? Everybody can hear? Yeah. So this presentation is based on research that I conducted with my colleagues in Cuba. And the point of the research was to examine the perceptions, the impressions of a sample of Cuban Jews to understand how the many changes that have taken place in Cuba over time have shaped the Jewish community. So the goal was to understand from Cuban Jews themselves what it means to be Jewish in Cuba today. And it's important to note that being a Jew in Cuba must be understood as a reflection of historical change that has taken place over time throughout the course of the 20th century. So an emphasis for us was placed on how Jewish organizations like the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, used the familiarity of pro-social behavior, also found within communist ideology, to promote pro-social religious and cultural practices among Jewish children and adolescents, ultimately triggering a shift in the way that Judaism evolved on the island. And the research is based on interviews that we conducted with Cuban Jews in the cities of Havana and Santa Clara. So 2 cities that we went to, and those are the 2 largest Jewish communities in Cuba. And we interviewed Jewish people in those 2 cities. And we encouraged those that we interviewed to tell their stories of what it means to be Jewish in Cuba today and to describe their Jewish ancestry. We asked them to tell us about how they live their lives, how they practice Judaism, in what ways they subjectively experience their lives today as Cuban Jews. There are a number of historical, educational, and contemporary factors which make the island's Jewish community an interesting subject of study. But before getting into the study specifics, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Jewish community in Cuba. So Jews arrived in Cuba in 1492, along with the Jewish people that came to the United States, and again in the 16th and 17th century, and a larger number came in the 1800s. And after the Spanish-American War, a number of Jews came to Cuba, and by 1924, there were 24,000 Jews living in Cuba. The U.S. government had a lot of influence over the island up until 1959, when Batista, who was in charge of Cuba, was overthrown by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. And around this time, the population was 15,000 Jews. After the revolution, 94% of the Jewish community fled the island. And those that stayed because they were either too poor to leave or too assimilated into Cuban society, or they believed in the revolution. So throughout the time that Fidel Castro was in charge of Cuba, there was discrimination against all religious groups, including Jews. And due to this atmosphere of discrimination, Jewish life suffered in Cuba, but it never disappeared. Synagogues closed and were taken over by the government. There was increased assimilation among the elder people. But over the time, there was little to no anti-Semitism. The synagogues were abandoned. The And in 1998, a lot of things changed when the Pope came to visit Cuba. So today, present Jewish life in Cuba is alive. And some would say that it's more alive than in other parts of the world, which are even considered more free. There are approximately 1,500 Jews living in Cuba today, and 90% of those live in Havana. In the Sunday school, in the shul called the Patronato, there are 150 students, and they range in age from 4 to 60. The Jewish community is growing in Cuba, but not because people are coming to Cuba, but because of intermarriage. More than 60% of the Jews in Cuba today are converts. In 2008, Raul Castro took over as head statesman, and the pace of reform has picked up in Cuba. For example, today, Cubans can set up their own businesses, they can be self-employed, they can buy and sell their own houses, and they can travel abroad without permission. And Raul Castro is dedicated to turning the Cuban economy around. That's his major emphasis. So back to this study. So we used open-ended questions to speak with Cubans that we interviewed. We asked about their personal histories, we asked about their families prior to coming to Cuba, we asked why they came to Cuba, what life was like when they arrived, and what life is like right now. Our emphasis was on Jewish life, but we didn't limit the discussion to only Jewish life. So from our interviews, there were 5 main areas that we felt were important to write about. Religion was one, family life, communal organizations, an ethic of caring, continuity, collective Judaism, and youth involvement. And for each of these areas, I'm going to give you a little bit of background, and then I'll give you some of the direct quotes that we got from our respondents. And at the end, I'll discuss some implications and some current changes that are taking place now, including President Obama leaving office and Trump coming into office, and how that might affect the Jewish community. So the first is religion. So our respondents indicated that between the 60s and the 90s, the practice of religion was discouraged and practically disappeared. One of our respondents stated, "My father was a revolutionary and died as a real fidelista," meaning that he was connected to Fidel. In those days, being Jewish was a taboo. When looking for a job, if you indicated Jewish or Catholic, forget about it. So they forgot about it. Another respondent echoed this sentiment, explaining that it was not anti-Semitism because the same thing happened to Catholics and the same thing happened to others. With regard to being persecuted for practicing one's religion, one respondent stated, "Religious persecution never existed, but some kind of discrimination did. It was inconceivable that someone could be religious and be a member of the Communist Party." Another respondent stated, "I remember that once a friend of mine, his mother died, and his brothers decided to go to church to have a mass. One brother didn't go inside because he was a member of the Communist Party. Today, that seems ridiculous." So the literature explains that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Cuba implemented an easing of government controls in a number of areas, including religion. Respondents indicated that in 1992, Cuba modified its constitution to reflect that the country was no longer atheist, but rather secular, and that it recognized a respected and guaranteed freedom of religion. And this resulted in a resurgence of interest in Judaism. One respondent shared his impressions of how this came about, suggesting that it was a response to events that had already taken place beneath the surface. He stated, "This was something that was changing, and when a decree arrived, everyone was already there. The decree only legalized what had already begun." In general, respondents echoed these sentiments, suggesting that this policy shift unleashed a religious resurgence, which continues to evolve today. One respondent said, "In the beginning, it was difficult. There were only 10 Sunday school students. Some people didn't even know they were Jewish. It was very hard to tell people, 'You're Jewish, join the community.'" In general, respondents were in agreement that a resurgence had taken place. One respondent stated, "People had practically abandoned religion, and now there has been a rebirth." Respondents of this study related that after the revolution, the rabbis, Jewish teachers, and leaders all left the country, leaving Cuban Jews without any Jewish leadership at all. The chief rabbi of Cuba, who currently lives in Santiago, Chile, travels to Cuba several times each year to officiate at Jewish life cycle events, circumcisions, and conversions. But there is no rabbi in Cuba that lives there. So that's religion. So family life, another area that we found interesting. A number of respondents explained that when one family member became involved in Jewish activities, institutions, or rituals, other family members followed suit. While this was not the case in every family, we did note this as a trend. One mother stated, "My brother gave my daughter a book about Judaism. Here it is." She pointed to the book. "And she took an interest and began asking questions. So we began attending synagogue. After that, she went to Sunday school. Then she began studying Hebrew." Another respondent, who was a convert, stated, "Right before my Jewish mother-in-law died, she told me to make sure that my two boys should know about their heritage. I was not Jewish at the time, and my husband was killed in a car crash. The boys began to ask questions, so I began to take them to synagogue. And little by little, things happened for us." Respondents also expressed that there are very few Jews in Cuba with any significant extended family. And as a result, many respondents expressed that the community has become their family. One stated, "In Cuba, I don't have my family. My parents went, my brother and sister are gone. It is just three of us and the people in the community." In terms of organizations, respondents indicated that Jewish fraternal organizations like B'nai B'rith are popular venues for socialization and volunteerism. These types of groups offer a way to connect to a Jewish way of life for those that aren't religious-minded. One respondent remarked, "I met an old friend after exchanging greetings on the street. He said, 'I go to synagogue.' Then he said, 'I also attend B'nai B'rith.' I said, 'I think I would like that.' I knew that I wanted a Jewish connection, but didn't know how to begin. I was not very interested in synagogue, although I frequently attend now. And that's how it began for me." Respondents spoke about a number of Jewish organizations and agencies, all of which play an important role in the lives of Cuban Jews. They explained that once the environment became more conducive to an outward expression of religion, the international Jewish community began to provide financial and spiritual support. One respondent stated that the Joint Distribution Committee managed to revive the Jewish community, especially because of their focus on young people. They support the community, but primarily with activities. "It's not like they hand out a toothbrush," one respondent stated. "I mean, I don't go home with a pair of shoes from the JDC. The JDC feeds the soul." An ethic of caring was one area that a lot of respondents talked about. And in general, the Jewish respondents indicated that the Jewish communities worldwide take care of their Jews, and the Jewish community also follows suit. A sizable proportion of respondents made reference to this ethic of caring that's been passed down from generation to generation. The following quote is representative of sentiments held by many of our respondents. "As a child, we were taught that one could feel satisfaction by caring for others. This is our heritage, to want to help. It's what has been passed down from my parents, from my grandparents, from my great-grandparents. This ethic of caring, a characteristic of pro-social behavior, which is really altruism, is a desire to help people without preconditions. This is related to evolutionary theory through the concept of kin selection, which states that people will help others who are related to them, even if there is a cost to that help. According to this theory, the closer the relation, the stronger the feeling. With respect to the theory of evolution, this is because we want our genes to survive for future generations. And this can be certainly seen within the Jewish community, from family member to family member and from Jew to Jew. But also, it's something that exists en masse in Cuba, rooted in the way a deliberate effort was made to socialize children into altruistic beings. With regard to continuity, respondents indicated that continuity of the Jewish community is a looming concern, even given the realities of Jews immigrating out of Cuba and no in-migration. Today, there are no Jews moving to Cuba. That's been the case for many, many years. In many ways, conversion has been embraced as a creative continuity strategy. Respondents explain that while intermarriage within the greater Jewish world is viewed as a threat, in Cuba, intermarriage is welcomed, and it's more the norm. One respondent noted that the supply of available marriage partners is limited. In general, the large majority of our respondents explained that most of those who intermarry choose to convert and identify as Jews. Although Judaism is most often selected by the non-Jewish spouse, respondents indicated that the process is rigorous, complying with strict halacha, and one respondent stated, if she is not Jewish and wants to convert, she has to pass a seminar of 7 to 8 months. Then she has to pass the tribunal. If it is a he, it is more painful because he has to be circumcised. We do not have many he's who choose to convert. Respondents indicated that Judaism in Cuba has been influenced by the island's collectivist socialist tradition. One respondent explained that in Cuba, unlike other countries, people don't usually celebrate Jewish holidays at home. It is a communal effort. We celebrate together in the synagogue. If someone wants to do it at home, they do know how, but choose to celebrate together as a community. Another stated, in the rest of the world, Jews support their synagogue. In Cuba, the synagogue supports the Jews. Youth involvement was a very important area that we researched. And I'll tell you a little story after I talk about this area of my own experience. Respondents expressed that individuals who grew up after the Revolution had little knowledge or exposure to Jewish customs, traditions, or religion. And recognizing this, the JDC and the Jewish leadership that had come about in Cuba chose to target their recruitment efforts at youth. They imagined that this strategy might yield more long-term outcomes. So innovative social, recreational, cultural, and educational activities were offered, including youth groups, trips, and camp. One adolescent that we interviewed exuberantly described the array of activities which filled her week. She stated, I go with my youth group friends at least once a week and almost every weekend. We play dominoes, we dance, maybe we play volleyball. There are activities after Friday services. I participate in the service, and then after services, they're singing with the chorus. On Sunday, we have Sunday school, and I help out in the library. There are art lessons and more. For other youth in Cuba that aren't Jewish, they don't have these kind of activities. So this was something of a novelty for Jewish youth. Respondents indicated that although activities existed for preschool through older adults, it's through youth that the community's survival has been realized. One respondent stated, the youth lead services on Friday night and Saturday. They lead the community Seder. Young people organize holiday celebrations. Another stated, it's very important for the youth to play this kind of role and not the adults, because they are the future. Respondents, especially the youth interviewed, described having rigorous school schedules and other extracurricular activities. By comparison, their schedules showed little difference to youth in Israel, to the United States, and to other Jewish communities throughout the world. Cuban youth are drawn toward the Jewish community, and they prioritize choices to engage in Jewish activities over other options. One respondent stated, here in Cuba, the kids want to come. They feel good here. They wait all week for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to come to the shul. Another stated, when Americans visit, they can't believe their eyes. They see all the youth involved in all these activities. They say, I have to push my children and my grandchildren to go to synagogue. So I replied to them, if you want your children to be better Jews, send them to Cuba. When respondents were asked why they chose to affiliate with the Jewish community, they explained that there was an initial spark within, and that was their motivator. The quality of the experience that they were given kept them coming. Respondents explained that they became more connected over time. Traditions were brought home to their families. One respondent explained that people did not want to come to the synagogue. A whole generation of Jews was lost. Now, youngsters learn and transmit that knowledge to their parents. A 67-year-old respondent stated that he has never gone to the synagogue on his own. He said, "First I was taken by my parents, and now I'm taken by my children." So with regard to the future, respondents exhibited concern and hope. One respondent stated, "Here people are Jews because they want to be. They are very proud. They wear it on their sleeve. People visit Cuba from all over. They see the pride we have for our heritage and what we've accomplished. Although small, we are recognized all over the world." Another respondent stated, "There's a vitality here that didn't exist before. But what will happen if all the young Jews leave?" This appeared to be a widespread concern. Approximately 600 Jews have emigrated from Cuba to Israel since 1990. One respondent stated, "If the youth leave, we fear that it will be the end of the Jewish community." Another respondent stated, "There's a vitality that exists because of the young people. What will happen when they leave?" Other respondents were more optimistic. One stated, "I think the majority of youngsters will stay. I'm an optimist. Let's continue to be optimistic." Some of these sentiments stem from the view that youth feel an ownership for their community. One respondent stated, "When I was young, the community belonged to old rich people. Now it belongs to the young." So some implications. In general, we found clear evidence of a dynamic Jewish community that, although faced with significant challenges, is actively engaged in efforts to ensure its continued vitality. The community receives support from organizations, from synagogues, from individuals throughout the world, and with this support, the community will have a continued steady pace. We found a community where Judaism is passed up, from children to parents, which appears to run counter to the way Judaism is transmitted between generations in other parts of the world. In the United States, for example, parents bring their children to synagogue, they bring their children to Hebrew school, to holiday celebrations, to Jewish cultural events. In Cuba, children bring their parents. Our respondents indicated that the Jewish community has a lot to offer youth. There's social, there's recreational, there's cultural activities, there's networks of friends, there's camp trips, there's communal celebrations. Efforts by Jewish leadership to maintain constant contact with youth and offer consistent programs of activities appears to have paid off. It's exemplified by the priority and attention that Jewish youth have placed on the participation in Jewish life. We also found, as I said before, that intermarriage is viewed by many Jews as a threat. In Cuba, it's welcomed and encouraged. Respondents explained that if it were not for intermarriage, continuity would be completely at risk. Respondents indicated that Judaism is generally practiced in a communal context. As a communally organized society, Cubans are used to societal norms of collectivism and pooling resources that tends to extend to how religion is practiced. Cubans share holidays together, they share Shabbos meals together, and life cycle events are shared together. Finally, our respondents indicated that being Jewish transcends ethnicity, nationalism, and religion. As we noted when we asked respondents, "Are you a Cuban Jew or a Jewish Cuban?" our respondents had no need for such distinctions. One respondent stated, "Being Cuban and being Jewish are two different things that are felt and that are intense. I would say that I'm a Cuban first, but a Jew deepest." The exodus of 90% of Cuba's Jews nearly destroyed the community 50 years ago. Many of those nurtured as leaders left for Israel. The impact on this exodus on the future of the community remains to be seen, and it's obvious that the future rests with the younger generation. Cuban Jewish identity will also be affected by the future of U.S.-Cuban relations and the contact that Cuban Jews and American Jews have with one another. Many unknowns exist, given the dynamic complexity of events and situations in Cuba today. There's no doubt, however, that changes that take place will have an impact on the Jewish community, but only time will tell how much. It remains unclear on how President Obama's rapprochement with Cuba, President-elect Trump, or the death of Fidel Castro will affect the Jewish community today. That's it. microphone.
Any questions? This is supposed to...
Questions? Yes.
Did your research cover at all of those people that you interviewed, why they remained?
Yes.
That's, I think, what's interesting. 90% or so
Right.
left.
Yes, they remained because they were either too poor to leave, they aligned themselves with the revolution, or they were interested in, in staying and trying to keep the Jewish community that was there alive. Because they were seeing everybody else leave, and they figured that in order to have a Jewish community in Cuba, they would either have to stay, or most of them, though, were too poor to leave. Yes?
Well, I was born and raised in Cuba until 1968 when we left, and that was relatively late because most people left in 61, 59 to 61. A number of people had to stay because there was a restriction that if you were of military age and a male, you couldn't leave. And then by then, most people who had to stay for the military reasons would stay. So I think that that's a particular circumstantial.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that I was going to add to your excellent presentation is that we left in January of '68. My parents are both Eastern European Jews from Poland, so I'm first generation Cuban. In '67, after the '67 war, when Cuba decided that it was becoming a socialist, they were in very good terms with Israel. So the Jews that remained, like my family, were often invited to the Israeli embassy, and the schools were still open, the patronato was still happening, and so on. It was only after the '67 war happened that literally in a dime, things changed. I mean, I still remember going to school and being harassed for the first time, and the teacher going to a diatribe about the Jews and because Fidel decided he was going to side with the Arabs. I mean, it was that arbitrary. So the experience of growing up under that kind of regime was basically that you really, basically can't trust anybody, because anybody in your neighborhood could. It was like like the Stasi in East Germany or whatever. And you're really at the mercy of whatever the government is. Now, I would just also add that just about everybody of my generation, that is the first generation Cubans that I grew up with, almost all of us left, either very early or by the late 70s. And so the people that remained were very, very few, and obviously various, intermarriage was the norm.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
anyway.
Right.
Just
But
answer your
yes. Yeah. It's interesting. Today, though, if you go to the Patronato, you go to the shuls there, you see a very invested Jewish community. That they're the ones after the Pope came, things opened up a lot. And Fidel had visited the Patronato every year on Hanukkah, and Raul actually was there this week. So there is this openness and more of an embrace of the Jewish community than it had been certainly when they were aligned with the Muslim communities. Today, they're not so aligned with the Muslim communities. Now, they're not aligned with anybody. When the Soviet Union sort of left, that impacted a lot of the economy of Cuba. So now Raul is hoping to open the economy a little bit more, a little differently than Fidel had the economy.
Yeah, I just want to add, Cuba always had relationships with everybody else but the United States.
Yeah.
Right, so they had relationships with Canada, to whom they owe millions of dollars. They always had relations, so they have always used the excuse of the embargo for their failed economic system.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, because I feel very sorry for the people who stayed, because they have suffered tremendously.
Yeah. But under President Obama, the embargo was lifted a little, not enough, but just a little. Things are just starting to change a little bit now, and we don't know what's going to happen with our next president. But the embargo definitely affected them. The medical supplies are very, very low. The Jewish community depends on people coming on trips to bring pharmaceuticals and other things. Wheelchairs, they don't have machines. You go for a MRI, they don't have a machine. These are things that, because of the embargo, they were affected. So if they were to get equipment, it has to come from other places. And the United States being so close, that's where one would imagine all the supplies come from. But they sort of stopped everything from getting in. Any other questions?
Is there a Chabad? Is there a Chabad?
There's no Chabad, no.
I wonder why.
Well, I don't know. Right now, they're not really allowing a lot of other organizations besides the JDC and B'nai B'rith to operate there, so that could be the reason. They have the only rabbi that they have is from Chile. They don't have their own rabbi yet, so we'll see what happens.
So of the 60% of today's Jews who are converts, how many do you think intermarried for the increased benefits that you mentioned before, whether through organizations or tourists that come through?
I don't know how many married for benefits. I think that a lot of people married because they either had a spouse who was Jewish. The people that converted are not the people that didn't have any connection to Judaism. They're people that either had a grandchild in some way or a spouse, but they didn't really. You don't find people like from the valley, the hills, that came down to convert to Judaism for because there's some benefits. That's very. I would say I didn't even see any of that. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation, and I want to follow up on that previous question. 60% conversion, something says to me that they were missing something in their lives that Judaism or the Jewish tradition was presenting, and I wonder, is there something like a club model or a tribalistic model that resonates on a deep level with the human animal from an evolutionary past? If we, were originally 50 to 150 people bonded together intimately, so is there something missing in Cuban nationalism that just wasn't satisfying some deep need for some sort of collective identity?
Well, there's the familiarity of the communist sort of collectivism model, and so when an outsider who isn't Jewish looks at the Jewish community, they see that in a more intense way, because Jews care for each other and they celebrate together, and the community is like an extended family. So perhaps that could be a part of the reason that there's this comfort in the Jewish community. Sort of, it's a welcoming, and the collectivism that was already sort of innate within the community was something that was attractive to others.
Has there been any ongoing exchange programs, let's say between youth, B'nai B'rith, coming to Cuba, or Cuban youth then going outside and learning more about their Judaism, number one? And number two, have there been any scholar in residence programs where rabbis or cantors, performers come and inspire? And if there hasn't, is there a need for something like that?
Okay, so on your first question, I know that Cubans do March of the Living as a group. They do it and they come back to Cuba after. There's always some that that decide after that they want to leave. But there are also, I think through the JDC, they bring groups of kids to Argentina, to Chile, and to other South American countries for camps experience. To Maccabi, they had a Maccabi group that went from Cuba to participate in the South American Maccabi games. So there are those kind of exchanges. People coming in is rare. I didn't see much of that. I know that there was one person that talked about an exchange on a college level, where an American student or students came into Cuba to study in the University of Havana, and then they went back. But that was sort of rare, and it was happening. They said it was going to happen more, but was happening on a limited level. What was the second?
Scholar in residence programs?
No. The only scholar that comes is the rabbi, and he comes in and he does, he does lecturing, I guess, but he also does all the ceremonial things. But in terms of others coming in, I mean, you will find rabbis who come as with their own synagogue groups that come from Israel. They come from all over. They bring shuls to tour and to see the Jewish community. And when they're there, they do some speaking, but in terms of any formal invite, I didn't see any of that.
And is there an interest to do something like that?
There might be. I mean, the person who's in charge of the Jewish community today is Adela Dworkin. She took over after the person who really was in charge. Did you know Adela? No. The person who was really in charge of the Jewish community died. And she's been trying more and more to do some outreach and to bring people in. It's really opening up a lot more. And I was there 7 or 8 times, but I haven't been there in a few years. So I don't know, over the past few years, even more could have, it was sort of exploding over the time I had gone every year. I would see more and more that it was more and more advances. But then, over the past couple of years, it could have even gone, and I haven't seen them.
We was 2 times in Venezuela, and we see the process. It's like what happened in Cuba, because Venezuela was a great community there. It was wonderful there.
Yeah.
And now we see the same process in Venezuela like in Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
They have not paper for paper things that you need for every day. And it was like 6 schools.
Mm.
Now 1 or 2 schools. The majority of the people live to Miami, and some of them come to Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So what you think about the process? Maybe the same happened like in Cuba.
It could be. Whenever there's a shortage of resources, people don't want to stay around. So that could happen in any place. I mean, Venezuela is much more open than Cuba was. People really can come and go as they across the border if they want to. But in Cuba, you couldn't, because you had to swim or take a boat, and you couldn't really do that, and you couldn't leave without money. So it was a little different. I think that any country where there's scarce resources, there's going to be people that don't want to stay anymore, and so they're leaving. I think it could follow very similar to what happened in Cuba. That's what the majority of Jews left when they left, was because of the resource limitations.
Yeah, I'd like to add something else too. A lot of Jews, when they, in Cuba prior to the revolution, had to have their own businesses because there were laws against Jews or any foreigner having jobs with the government. And then when the revolution came, basically either the businesses were nationalized or threatened to be nationalized, and so Jews were left in a kind of no man's land. And so most Jews saw the writing on the wall, left very early.
Mm-hmm.
My father was very stubborn and believed Castro wasn't going to last, so he was gone, which is why we stayed as long as we did. But we did have a store, and it was nationalized, and then returned because it was so small. But we knew that, again, the writing was on the wall. But I guess the thing, and this goes back to the issue with Venezuela, it's not just that this is happening in Venezuela. You have a failed economic system that has taken a very wealthy country like Venezuela and has turned it into a very poor country like Cuba.
Yeah.
Almost overnight.
Yeah.
And so I think that ultimately I'm of course very proud to have my background and very happy that there is a resurgence of interest in Judaism. But I feel that ultimately the onus of responsibility is on the leaders of the revolution who have destroyed a country and have made people for 50 years suffer, and they still don't take any responsibility. They're still blaming the United States, while we're still blaming Venezuela.
Yeah. Well, look, today, in those countries, the focus is on economic reform. As the leadership sort of transitions from where it was in a sort of a very clear communist sort of ideology, it has sort of, as the leaders have died and other leaders have taken over, that has changed a little bit into more openness, and that people are choosing to maybe try and stay and make it work if the economy has a chance of improving. But people leave. If the economy's not good, people leave. That's the story. And that's what happened in Cuba for the most part.
One quick question. When you originally sent me your proposal, we were talking about the ethic of caring. And one of the things that altruistic behavior seems to be able to maybe predict is greater descendant leaving. In other words, more genetic offspring. I don't suppose that there's a connection there, but do you see the more that they have this sense of the ethic of caring, do the communities grow more quickly? Do they expand and get bigger in that sense?
I would say yes. As people are exposed to that, there's something contagious about it because there's something innate about it. Mm-hmm. So I think that the ethic of caring that's built within us, and that is easily sort of externalized when it's seen and felt, that is something that people could become attracted to. It's like anything else that is sort of an innate human characteristic, that when others see it and they like it, they're going to sort of want to stick to it like glue. So I think that it works in the same way, and it has worked in the same way.
All right.